Hey, I'm Chris Thoreau, and I'm excited to be sharing my microgreens growing experience with you here at Modern Grower. Throughout our series of tutorial videos, I'll be going into detail on a wide range of topics, which include equipment requirements and setup options, growing methods and troubleshooting, hygiene and sanitation, crop planning, financial planning, and a lot more. But before we get into our instructional videos, let me give you an introduction to myself and my microgreens growing experience. I got my start in agriculture in 2001 by running a small-scale certified organic farm on Vancouver Island, just off the coast of British Columbia here in Western Canada. I grew a mix of vegetable crops on about half-acre of land, which I sold at farmers markets and restaurants in the region. I also grew vegetable and flower seeds, which I continue to do to this day. Now, prior to this, I had no farming experience, but luckily there was a great community of growers in that area that offered great support to get me going and keep me going. I did that in part because I had seen that nobody was really offering any sort of microgreens at my local farmers market. I ran that farm for about 7 years, and it was in my last year of production that I introduced sunflower shoots to my growing system. And having grown sunflower shoots at home for many years previously, I had a feeling there'd be a pretty good market for it. The sunflower shoots ended up doing very well at the market, and that gave me a good sense of the economic potential for sunflower and other microgreens crops. In 2008, I moved to Vancouver to complete a Bachelor of Science in Agroecology at the University of British Columbia, and this move presented a bit of a dilemma for me. How do I continue to effectively engage in agriculture while being full-time in school and living in the city? It really didn't take me long to figure out that growing microgreens was probably my best bet for continuing to engage in agriculture and potentially run an economically viable food production business in an urban environment. Now, it's important to keep a few things in mind here. First, there wasn't much of a microgreens presence on the internet at that time, so for all intents and purposes, I was really starting from scratch, though I do want to give a shout out to the videos I did find at the time that did really help me along. Second, in Canada, microgreens are essentially considered sprouts, and sprout production needs to be done to a high hygienic standard to reduce the risk of human pathogens. So this left me with the question, how do I grow microgreens which in Canada have pretty strict guidelines on a small scale and in an urban environment? Having talked to other farmers, I learned that the hygiene requirements for sprout production was one of the main things preventing them from pursuing them as a new crop. To explore how best to grow microgreens in the city, what I did was take advantage of my role as a student, and in 2008 and 2009, I did a directed studies project to research and develop a small-scale microgreens production system that was in adherence to Canadian sprouting guidelines. This was a great way to earn some credits and get a new business off the ground. As a directed studies project, I sold $11,000 worth of sunflower shoots at a local farmer's market and to a local grocer over a 5-month period. Not really enough to meet my living expenses, but enough to convince me that growing microgreens could be a viable business. Now, the basic production system in that time was pretty simple. A series of covered benches for climate and pest control, and a microspray irrigation system. And over the next 5 summers, I used these growing benches with pretty good success, but eventually wanted to expand to year-round production, which was possible but not easy in the benches. So in 2013, I transitioned my sole proprietorship into a cooperative, the Vancouver Food Peddlers Co-op. We got some funding to convert a 40-foot shipping container into a greenhouse production space. Now, the idea behind the shipping container was pretty simple. When you're building infrastructure for urban farming, it's really hard to have land tenure and land security. And so this was a way of addressing that by having a movable production space. I continued to work in that space with the food peddlers until 2017, when after about 10 years of commercial production, I moved on to some other projects, including completing a master's degree at UBC, and since that time I've been mostly focused on microgreens research. For the past 2 years, I've been conducting most of my research here at Modern Grower, focused primarily on sowing rates and expected yields for many crops. But we've also been researching different growing techniques, watering methods, and lighting options. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this Modern Grower series on commercial microgreens production is what I've learned through over 17 years of production and research experience, as well as what I've learned from talking to other growers and following trends through online microgreens forums. I delve deep into the topics to give you a good sense of what you need to know to run a successful microgreens business, but I also try to keep things simple and down to earth so you don't get overwhelmed. So, whichever of our instructional videos you watch, whether on growing methods, troubleshooting, infrastructure setup, navigating regulations, or managing orders, I hope they help you in your journey by giving you the deep understanding of microgreens that you'll need to establish a successful business.